It's a minute exactly gone past the hour of 9 o'clock in the morning time. It's the sound of Classic, a Classic 105.5 and 105.9. And I want to say good morning to our viewers on GBN television. That's on Channel 7, Channel 11, or Channel 20 if you are in cable. Welcome to another episode of To The Point for today, the 16th day of the month of December. A special good morning to those of you that's joining us via the World Wide Web at www.gbn.gd, or you're probably on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, whichever platform that you're on. We say thanks for being part of this broadcast. We're about to delve into another sensitive. It isn't normally when we do radio, there's some topics we refer to as sexy, the scandalous ones where everybody gets to just chime in and say what they want, But there are those that comes when it comes to the heart, that touches our emotion, it touches our inner nerve and the sinew. It's a conversation that we are going to talk about this morning. Violence, as it is, but with a specific hint reference to violence against women and girls, and by extension violence in all form and nature. As we said, there is no place in society for it, so that would be the basis of our conversation, but it's something that we really need to address as a people. And the good thing about this panel this morning is an all-male cast, and it's always excellent when you have an all-male cast raising and lifting voices against the issue of violence as it is. My guest this morning, no stranger, Tyrone has literally resurrected himself from the backside of the desert, and he's making a double appearance this week. My good friend Otto Pierre, I'm not sure where he's been, but he's looking well. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Cadore, and thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you.
Good morning, Grenada.
Good morning to you, gentlemen. Gentlemen, we're going to go right at it. It's a limited overs match, so we don't have time for poking, and we going in and we're going to wait for first go. Let's establish, gentlemen. I mean, there's no hiding the argument. The issue of violence, and with specific reference to violence against women and girls, it is a chronic, growing problem in our society. Do you agree, Mr. Otto Pierre? What say you?
Yes, I do agree. We can just look back at some of our headlines in the various newspaper, and even some of the headlines coming out from our radio and television programs and news. Just go back 5 years, and you will recall murders. You would recall, issues. Statistics from UN Women, they on Grenada specifically said 1 in every 4 Grenadian women has suffered physical violence at some point in their life. 1 in every 4 Grenadian women, has suffered physical violence at some point in their life, and that's an alarming bit of statistic. In fact, there is if we shift to the region a little bit, and we kind of shift off a little bit to sexual violence, it's about 86.4% of women in the Caribbean would have experienced some form of sexual violence or forced sex at the initiation of sex. No. So those are some serious statistics as it relates to women and girls.
And this is happening in Grenada, not in the backside in some uncivilized society.
It's happening right open. It's happening right, if you maybe look across at your neighbor, it's happening.
Tyrone, harrowing.
Yes.
It tells a harrowing tale, doesn't it?
It tells a harrowing tale, but it's also a tale that should have us all hanging our heads in shame.
That's right.
This has happened and continues to happen over generations. And unfortunately, despite a lot of movement that have been made in terms of the law and so on in Grenada, we still have a lot of incidents. And if you don't mind, Joseph, I'd just like to piggyback a little bit on the conversation that you had earlier on your open discussion this morning. I listened before I left home, and persons were calling in, it has become topical again, the sexual violence against a young child. and the young man who has now been found guilty in a court in the United States. Now, it's interesting that this matter happened over 2 years ago. He was given the perpetrator was given what people may consider a very lenient sentence, a very lenient penalty. He left Grenada, and now that it is coming to the news that he's been made to pay for his crime in the States, Grenadians have a lot to say. And as I was listening to the program this morning, I wondered, where was this outrage and anger 2 years ago when the guy was physically here? You know, it's easy to be an armchair advocate, to sit down at home, call into a radio station or a TV station, make a point, get something off your chest. But the work that needs to be done is going to take a few brave men and women to stand in the breach and say that this is not acceptable, and we as a society will not tolerate it, because sexual violence against our women and children is quite high. And Arthur gave you one statistic in terms of the percentage of women in the Caribbean whose first sexual initiation is forced, meaning it's forced. Another thing that the statistics tell us is the people who do the forcing, the majority of predators who force these women and girls into sexual initiation are usually persons that they know well, you know, members of their own families, members of their or close friends of their families, or people who have fairly prominent positions in society. And too often, whether it's little boys, little girls, or older women, the perpetrators seem to get away. Not only in terms of what happens at the justice system level, sometimes they seem to get a free pass from the community, because rather than hold them accountable, we blame the victims, right? We blame the victims' parents. We seem to behave as if every child that steps out in the road must be a victim, or at least is potentially a victim, especially if the child or the woman chooses to dress in a particular way. And I found it particularly interesting this morning that here we're talking about a man who forced a 5-year-old child to commit a sexual act on him. Quite aside from the fact that the justice system may have been lenient in terms of the punishment or lack of punishment that was visited upon him, somebody called and referred to him as a gentleman. Somebody was saying on your program this morning, oh, the gentleman this and the gentleman that. What part of a man that forces himself sexually on a 5-year-old boy or a 5-year-old child or any child, where's the gentleman part in that? Why are we still being nice to these criminals? That's what they are. We want to criminalize and penalize young fellas, 14, 15-year-old who have a roach or who are in a fight on the school compound. All of these we want to condemn. Of course, we want to make sure that, you know, we encourage our people to be nonviolent, etc., etc. But if we're going to be so harsh on juveniles, call them juvenile delinquents, and we want to throw the book at them, why are we referring to a grown man who forced himself sexually on a 5-year-old? Why are we referring to him as a gentleman? Where is the gentle part in that?
I prefer the term rogue, scoundrel, vermin,
criminal.
Yes.
Criminal.
And sometimes, and the truth is, I normally have to remind myself when I'm in this position that I have to maintain my balance order, that I don't get, because it's one of the topics that makes me become really, 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 really emotional. Yeah. But also, we talked about there's a culture. And let's go back to it. And it takes me back to a couple of years ago. I had an experience. We were discussing the very issue here. And that's the thing about the gentleman. This is not a today conversation. And then I left the studio and I broached the issue with a gentleman who, in most parts, we would seem to be a high-standard member of society. And we were talking about it. And his response was, and he was a man already in his well-gifted in age, grown man. And his response to me was, since I'm a little boy, these things happening. Therein lies the problem, Walter.
Of course, the question is, I mean, of course, if you look at our society, right, we have come out from slavery and colonialism, right, and we do have a residue of issues of violence coming out from that era. That has been part of our culture, but should it be a culture that we should embrace and continue when we see the suffering and the pain that is caused by violence? I mean, we have lost a lot of young men during between 2004 to 2008 or thereabout with the issues of quote unquote gang violence. And even through that period, I mean, whenever you lose people through deaths caused by violence, you're really and truly losing your human resource. So the question is, because it existed, a lot of things existed in many, many moons ago, but is it good for our society? Is it good for our families? Is it good for our community? I mean, that is a foolish question. You want to be able to have a family where love and care and all those good virtues are inculcated and are cultivated and grow. And if you put violence in that mix, you know definitely that it goes on from generation to generation. We must put a stop to the issues of violence, and we must use our mental faculties to be able to resolve the issues that may occur between us.
We'll all agree, Tyrone, that this is not a problem we will solve by one stroke of the brush, a stroke of the pen. Legislation has its part to play, but certainly we'll have to do with a shift in culture, the way we think, the way we groom our boys and our girls. What say you?
I agree. And we have to ensure that our children, as they grow up, understand and appreciate their own intrinsic value as human beings. The fact that they're special, they're important, the fact that they do not have to be in competition with anybody else, the fact that as parents, we would make the necessary investments, even emotional, especially in many cases, emotional investment, to ensure that our children are well-rounded. So that's in terms of the role of the family. But we call ourselves a Christian society as well. So there is a place for our religious institutions in this. We want our children to get an academic education, but they also have to get an education in social skills, in communication, in conflict management, in those soft skills that will help them to be able to interact and socialize with their peers in ways that do not promote violence. But for those things to happen, Joseph, we need to be very deliberate. For example, our Education Act in 2021 still says it is okay for corporal punishment to be used in the school system. There's a slight difference from before, where it says the punishment must be meted out by a designated officer in the school. But why do we still need to have children being beaten in the school system? Right? When children learn that it's okay from what they see adults doing. If a child does something at home, he's beaten. He does something in school, or he or she, they're beaten. Even in the church, I know of instances where on church day during the service, a child is behaving badly and the parent give the child a beating right there in church, and it's celebrated by the members of the church. Yes, you have to. Do you remember not to spare the rod and spoil the child? I have been in a church where the child was behaving in an unruly fashion, and the parent started to administer beating in the front row of the church. And when the parent thought his administration of the beating wasn't having the desired effect, he asked the pastor to help him. You know, so children are seeing violence occurring in their everyday lives in every sector, and therefore it becomes acceptable in their minds that if I do something that anybody else considers wrong, and that person thinking what I've done is wrong or unacceptable is going to beat me, when I have the physical strength, and when I'm bigger than somebody else, and I'm stronger than them, and they do something that I feel is unacceptable to me, I'm going to hit them, because that is what I've been taught to do. So we have to have a very deliberate approach where the state, with its various arms, the civil society organizations like Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic and other organizations, the faith-based organization, the churches, etc., where we all have to sort of agree on what sort of society we want to see, and have to agree to a common set of things that we will do together in our individual spaces of influence to work against this problem. If we don't take that approach, some of us are working against each other in terms of what we do and how we do it, and the problems will continue.
Also, let me throw this, let me bring this back to you. And I know, because there's a lot of dynamics in here. The issue of corporal punishment, that could be another Pandora's box by itself. But we highlighted the fact that we've adapted and we've grown up in a society, each and every one of us. The amount of licks we've gotten in our lives. I mean, thank God growing up, I was always an angel. So I was afraid of licks. My skin burned me once, and I understood that. I had a brother, he was quite the opposite. He told somebody one time that licks only burnt his skin. It meant nothing to him. But we grew up in a society where we've glorified the need to inflict pain as a form of correcting the wrongdoing of children. And we've highlighted that to the fact that we say that's what makes our society so different from North America, other societies where we seem to see them as rogues and breakaway children. What would be your response to that, Otter, as we address this underlying problem of violence?
It has to be an issue of what we model in front of our children, right? It also has to be an issue of really and truly using various means of discipline that could be nonviolent. Also, and it has also to do with education. How do we solve and resolve conflict? How do we teach the issues of respect for other person? And the truth is, our society is so filled with bad examples of that, even from our leaders. Like I deal with, assisting men to resolve issues of domestic violence and so on. And one of the things you want to be able to do is show them how to resolve a conflict. You have, and I'll just give you an example. I write a 6, and I show you the paper. You, from your perspective, you're seeing a 9. And we can have an argument over that. We can debate that for hours.
Right.
Huh? But where the problem comes up sometimes is when I start to call you names. I tell you you're stupid. I say you can't see. I tell you about your family and all of that. And it pans out. The issue it's not just an issue of physical violence, but it's also a psychological one. Now, when we see our leaders calling people's names and saying those things, it sets the example. That is a role model that sometimes we see, and that's a negative aspect of it. That is sometimes one of the things that can cultivate the issues of violence in our heads. And when we have that in our minds, it actually comes out in our actions. We have to be able to teach our children from a very early age respect for self, respect for others, the issue of discipline and hard work, and obviously we have to teach them how to resolve problems properly, how to communicate their feelings properly.
Wow.
I'd like to jump in, Joseph, because it's interesting in terms of the question you asked. I got a lot of blows for him, but I was a really nice child, right? I was disciplined, I was obedient, I was adventurous. Now, my mother today will say that it's because she beat me so much that I turned out the way. So you see, because she made a good child, right? So because I am of a certain disposition, she takes credit that it happened because of the beating. And of course, there are many of us who haven't gone through that feel, well, then it's okay to beat our children. I didn't beat my children. In my own personal parenting experience now, we have children in the home who are quite challenging to deal with. And one of the things that happens is sometimes the mother decides that she's going to beat. And I say, well, what's the point? Because as Arthur said, or as you said, your brother said after a while, well, it just stung for a few seconds, right? And often observe that sometimes a child who is about to be beaten puts more drama into the pre-lash than in the lash itself. You know, they're monger screaming and bawling and carrying on long before the first lash lands. And then after a couple of seconds, that's done. So the point is, I'm trying to say to parents, there are many, many ways we can discipline our children. And I think I made the point yesterday on this on our other program, Joseph, that there's a big difference between discipline and punishment. Discipline is a long-term thing that you do with love because you want the child to grow up well, to have values, to respect, etc. So you discipline and you do trade-offs in terms of, taking away privileges, etc., etc. Punishment usually comes on the heels of anger. I get so vexed with what he do that I have to give him 2 lash. Right. And those 2 lash with anything I could find to hit him with. And often that creates problems, psychological, emotional, physical, and other kinds of problems. So again, it's about us as parents as well, in our parenting experience today, sort of deliberately trying to ignore some of the negative things we've learned in terms of how we can, discipline our children. Because when young men and young women grow up, boys and girls grow up in an environment of constant violence, seeing violence, the men become abusers in their relationships to their partners. Women sometimes can become abusers to the children and also sometimes to their partners. So it has a rippling effect that goes well beyond the generation that is experiencing it now, which may have gotten it, seen it come through the generation prior, and it will continue unless there's some deliberate efforts made through education, public awareness building, training, social support, psychoeducational programming, a whole host of things that we must bring to bear as a society on challenging this problem.
There's an element of the male, his ego, that we hear about it ever so often, and I know three of us as men, we can associate with that. We safeguard our ego. You mentioned, Arthur, the whole idea of calling of names, and Terry, you made mention of it too. We see it on our political leaders, we see it our parents. They grow up where they tell you, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're this, you're that. And all of these negative intonations that comes with it. Not realizing that is an impact that it has on the child. There are some children, if they find the will to fight back there and then, they will fight back. How dare you? And there are others, do you think they go through this repressive mode where they hold on to it until they get to a point in life? I can't hit my mother. I would never do that. I won't raise my voice to my father. However, if I have somebody that seems to be, I now become the authoritative figure, maybe a younger sister, a younger brother, a partner, and I can exert that form of control now, or the same sentiments. Is that what happens mentally? I'm in charge now, so I'm going to do my thing.
Well, that is part of what happens. Again, we have to look at the issue of power and control. When persons find themselves sometimes at the position of power, where they can consider somebody else less powerful than them, you could look at the power play between maybe parent and child, or a man and a woman, right? You may see that sort of attitude playing out, okay? But the other issue too is that sometimes we facilitate it. We allow it because a man might have more money than the woman that he's living with. He has a bigger and better job. Right. He understands that she depends on him for her very survival, economically. All right. So he comes home and he doesn't get dinner. He doesn't get his meals on time, or she feels that she don't want to have sex with him tonight, and he exercises his power. He takes advantage of her just by the mere fact that he feels that he's more powerful than her. Okay, and we see that in our society, and sometimes. In a lot of cases, sometimes even society enables that sort of behavior. The man treating her good. Didn't see she get a new car and she living in a big house and she ain't even walking nowhere, but she has this and she has that because he provides it. And sometimes we excuse that sort of behavior, or not understanding that when you enter a relationship between man and woman, it's a partnership that you enter, and you go in there as equals.
You've also seen the influence of different cultures, gentlemen. Where you've seen these African movies, and I'm not hitting on any, but it just comes to me. And as you said, Arthur, well, where the mother would say to the daughter would say to the mother, "Listen, my boyfriend, husband, he's doing X, Y, and Z," and the response, as you say, is, "Well, Charlie, build your big house. He give you 2 children. You have a credit card." So it's as though to suggest that comes as part of the package. In order, you can't. It's almost like a symbiotic relationship. You can't separate the two. To get one, to earn one, this is what comes with it.
Well, Joseph, it's interesting you reference the African movies, but in reality, the African movies are a fairly recent introduction to our society. But this has been happening for donkey years, as what people will say.
But I'm happy you said that, because we talked about slavery and the culture that we've inherited.
Right. So that circular connection, yes. I remember even as a child when, and in my work professionally here, since I've been in this work for the last 30 odd years, where women, even grown women who are in really established relationships and, said, well, they might even go to sometimes another relative or a good friend and say, well, look at what happened. And the first question the person asks, well, what you do to make him vex again? Why you making him get vexed and have to hit you? As if this man has no control over emotions at all, as if this victim is a magician that has the ability to turn on this other person's anger, every so often. So we have to stop excusing that behavior. And I mentioned in other interviews about this, that violence thrives in this atmosphere, this conspiracy of silence, where people who see and know what's going on will not say anything for fear of various things, right? A relationship should not be a trade-off that in order for you to have access to the house, and it doesn't have to be a big house, it's not often a big car. And if one of the partners in the relationship is both partners are in a relationship, they have to provide for the financial support of the family. So one might be in a position to provide more than the other, but it is a collective responsibility. Now let's take this same example of this person who feels that they have economic power, but does not feel they have physical power over even the woman of the home, but they will turn that financial power on the children. And we have a lot of grown men in this country who are raping children, little girls and little boys daily, telling them, I just pay the rent, and I paying for cable, and I paying for this, and I buying your clothes to go to school. So if you tell anybody and the police arrest me, nobody will pay rent again. Nobody will buy food again, so you all might end up having to leave the house. Now imagine the double whammy, the double trauma that a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old child, and sometimes even younger, has to deal with when your body is being physically torn by somebody who's forcing you to have sex at an age when you're not ready for it, you can't legally give consent for it. So there's that physical pain. Then there is the shame of thinking I must be doing something wrong because this person is doing this to me. But on top of that, this child also have to think, but I am now responsible for the welfare of my family. Because if I were to tell, the family could fall apart because they would take away this nice man who is doing all these things for us, and then our family wouldn't be able to eat. And the child decides, okay, then I must suffer in silence because I can't be selfish and tell. Now, often when these things are happening, the perpetrators are known within the family, because if a perpetrator is today turning on a 13-year-old or 12-year-old girl child or 12-year-old child in family X today, there's a very good likelihood that same perpetrator has already abused another child in that family or another child, because they're never one-off perpetrators, right? So it might have happened before. People in the community are aware of this. People in the home are aware of this. People in the church may be aware of this, but nobody speaks out. People don't want to call the police. If they do call the police, they say, but I don't give him a name. I don't want to go and give no statement. I'm not going to court. And therefore, sometimes even the police ability to lay an appropriate charge against a perpetrator is frustrated because people are not prepared to stand up as witnesses and give the information. So this conspiracy of silence that surrounds perpetrators and ignores the victims, the needs of the victims, is also a large contributing factor to the high incidence of violence we have, sexual violence and other types in our society today.
29 minutes gone past the hour of 9 o'clock. We've highlighted some of the core challenges. Certainly, we'd also want to highlight how do we deal, what are some of the solutions to the problem. My guest this morning, Tyrone Buckmeyer, Autopair. We take a quick commercial break as we broach the issue of violence against women, against violence against in any form altogether. We'll be right back after this quick break.
Let's get tough on breed your larceny. It will destroy our economy. Larceny threatens our food security. Can hurt us locally, hurt us globally. To all the buyers, ask for license from all produce sellers. To all the people, 300 for police for them thieving fellas. To all the families, don't steal produce from your brother. Then you sell it to traffickers, hotels and street vendors. Nah, man. Let's do all we can to stop radio larceny. New vigilance, new laws, and a tough judiciary. Stop Grenada's organized business crime. It's time.
To report radio larceny, call 300.
Thank you. Welcome back to The Point. My guest this morning, Tyrone Buckmeyer, the Director of Legal Aid and Counseling, and Arthur Peer, had advocate and certainly does a lot of work in the field addressing the concerns and challenges of violence against women and violence altogether. Gentlemen, we've highlighted some of the root cause, and I know we'll both agree that this has to be an ongoing conversation that takes place on an everyday basis. We've highlighted problems. If possible, what are some of the solutions? And I want us to probably start at the home. And so that we don't even see it. The power play that happens between mommy and daddy, man and woman. Daddy trying to show that he's the best daddy that he can be, and as such he has to thump his chest, and when he gets home he has to walk around as king of the dance hall. Mommy's trying to be the best mommy that she can be the most submissive one, and says nothing. How does those things, those two power play, those two elements, those two contrasting behavior, how does it affect children, Arthur, and influence what they do and how they behave?
The issue of violence within the household affects children really, really bad. If you have a child that is an introvert, kind of looks into himself or herself, you find that child suffer in silence. That child may not necessarily perform very well at school. There are issues of low self-esteem. Children, when you look at the dynamics of where a child should be conceived and grow, it comes out of an atmosphere and an environment of love and care and so forth. Just the mere fact that a man having sex with a woman comes out from real care and love. And if a child is brought into that is what should be maintained. The home, for a child, the home is a secure environment. That secure space. You may have issues in school, you may have issues out in the playing field, but when you come home, you want that secure space there, and mommy and daddy are supposed to be able to do that. Now, if there are issues of violence, that child's entire world seems to be in trouble. It comes crashing down. And if a child is an introvert, that child suffers seriously in silence. They may not feel adequate. They may compare themselves to other children and feel that their family is better than mine, kind of story. So when we look at those children, that's the input. When we look at the other type of children, the extrovert, where they don't mind, they don't care, they sometimes become very rebellious, and they may also exercise issues of violence based on what they see model at home. They may not be able to solve problems. They may not be able to communicate. You may find them very, very rebellious, not cooperating with other entities in the society. And of course, that could lead further on if it is not controlled, if it is not addressed. Now, to be able to address that, persons must understand what needs to be done. All right? One of the problems that men have is a matter of communication. They don't communicate their feelings. All right? They come, they vex, they see something, and they are upset about it. They go on back down the road and they sit down and they drink, and sometimes after drinking, they come home and they could talk and they could get angry and they could throw a tantrum. The mother who may be trying just to cause the balance within the home, she herself is struggling. She's always fearful. All right. There might be issues of he just taking advantage of her sexually. You know, she might be raped and repeatedly, even within the confines of the home. And you know, we could begin to talk about a multiplicity of problems just by the issues that I highlighted there. What we need to do is to teach adults. Right? Because sometimes they have not gotten the opportunity to be taught how to resolve problems, how to communicate effectively, how to listen to one another effectively. And therein lies the problem. We have to begin to teach children how to resolve problems. Now, if we go back when we were growing up, all right, when we went out to play marbles or we went to play cricket or any particular sport, we learned conflict resolution. Right? You're playing marble, and persons were able to call you out if you were doing something wrong. We're playing cricket. If even if the ball was yours and you're out. Right. You understand? And everybody basically would chime in and say, no, you can't operate like that. If you want to take the ball and go home,
that's not what happened.
Exactly. We have learned to resolve problems. Now, when we look at our society today, even our children, a lot of times you find them confined to their homes. We have all the niceties, and so you don't have a TV, but many children have television and PlayStation and all of that, and they are at their home and they interact with that. Right. And not necessarily interact with each other. But that is why, for example, school is so very important. So when we have the issues of lockdown for the last couple of months, it affected how children are socialized and how they are able to resolve some of the issues that they have. Now, we have to be able to teach our children. And I mean, let me tell you, we task the school a lot of times with the responsibility of teaching our children the issues of conflict resolution and effective communication and so forth. But we have as adults, we have as parents to be able to teach them those things. I have 3 children, right? Well, actually 4 children. And when there are issues they would always be bantering with children. Yes. Right? Always be bantering. And you have to be judge, jury, and executioner sometimes, right? But you have to now guide them through how they resolve the issues. You have to guide them through. You can't say, don't call her that or don't call him that, and don't tell him to shut up and all of that. You have to learn to listen. One of the issues of listening, if I just should mention, a lot of times we listen just to respond. We don't listen to understand. So in a conflict, in a dispute, in an argument, we just waiting to pounce back, not necessarily trying to empathize and put yourself in the other person's position so that you could understand the problem. And because of that, we do have the issues that we see happening in our society today.
Sure, there's a lot of feedback, and I'm telling you, social media is busy. It is busy. It's interesting, and it's one of those conversations where the phone is not ringing, which is interesting. The phone is not ringing, but social media platform is a buzz. And there's a lot of conversation that eventually this is not one of the sexy ones. So this is not one of the sexy ones. So social media is going to go a buzz. There's a lot that we've introduced here. We talk about men and our inability. I don't have to say it our, because at the end of the day, we have to deal with this holistically. How we communicate. We grow up in a society where we teach our children holistically that they shouldn't talk back, don't say what's wrong with you. And somebody hinted at the fact, made a point that what needs to happen to address the problems that parents need to be closer to their children. Listen, Artie, as you said, listen to understand, Buckmeyer, what is it they say. Sometimes they may not be able to articulate it, but if you be able to get into a little quiet place with them, you will be able to realize that boy, that girl is actually hurting children.
Yeah, but we have to make the time to listen, right? We have to learn to do it and then make the time to do it. Too many of our parents are trying to bring up their children almost by remote control, and the way we control. Correct. Oh, hush now, you're talking too much with this. And I always example that in our society, we tend to force our children to make them to talk before they're ready.
Right.
A child lying on his back, an infant stretch, and he make his mouth in a particular way, and all the doting parents and grandparents and auntie and look, he trying to say, so what you saying? Oh Lord, he talking to me, and we kind of force drive the child. We make the child. We get to because we want to hear the child speak. We want the child to hear stuff. But conversely, as soon as the child starts to talk, we then
they're talking too much.
And tell the child to shut up. Oh God, you could talk in? Why you always think? We have to understand children are curious. They want to ask questions. And when they ask questions, they want to get answers. That is us teaching them to communicate. And sometimes it doesn't take as much as we think. It just needs time, but we can't all be locked into our cell phones or our tablets all the time or watching something on TV. And the children are sort of left to bring up themselves. As we talk about things like solutions and interventions, Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic runs a program called the Man-to-Man program. We've been doing this since 2005. Arthur and I have been involved with it for most of the time it's been running. This is a program where men who are charged with domestic violence related offenses can be sent by the court to Legal Aid to do this 16-week program, in which we work with them to help them precisely to learn things like effective communication, conflict management, and a whole host of skills. But we do some sessions, one called Family History, where we ask them to look at what did you learn from observing the adults in your life, your parents, your grandparents, your father, your mother, your aunts and uncles, from their interactions with each other. What did you learn about relationships, about dynamics, about power? We ask them to look at themselves, personhood, a session where we ask men to sort of look at you as an individual.
Right.
We have a session called Womanhood. Sometimes the guys come into this session and they're conflicted because they did something wrong to be in the program, but feel it's not my fault. I hit her because she asked for it. She made me hit her. And this is something people keep saying. And as I said earlier, where did women get all this magical ability to keep making people do things to them? Men have to be taught, both as boys and as men, to control their emotions, to communicate effectively, to express their anger in an appropriate fashion. Because if they don't, we're just going to keep letting them get away with bad behavior and make excuses. Let me give you an example, and we talk this example with the men all the time. A man goes to work this morning at 9 o'clock. He should be there for 8. He gets there at 8:45. His boss, a woman, is angry with him because he's late, and things that should have been done for the work have not been done because he's late. The boss gives him a real tongue whipping, right? She scolds him, she shouts at him, etc., etc. It could be a man boss. It doesn't matter the sex of the boss. The point is, and I'm using the example of a woman boss particularly though, to say he puts up with that. He doesn't get angry, or he may get angry, but he could swallow it. His pride is hurt, but he could swallow that. He wants to cuff something, but he wouldn't, because this is his boss he understands power over him in the workplace. So this very same man could control his emotions. He could swallow his pride. He could suppress his desire to express power and control, because this is a boss where the power dynamic is against him. Same man goes home at 4:15. He walks in the house and the broom is in front of the door. So whole morning I go and the broom's still there. How come you don't move the broom yet? And the woman say, well, you just come, you couldn't move it in your way. Bam, he feels he could slap her, he could cuff her down, he could knock her out. Because in the dynamic in his mind, the power dynamic has changed, right? He is the big man now, because this is home where he has some economic power or whatever. If he could control himself in the context of he's angry and his pride is hurt and all of that in front of his boss 8 hours ago, why can't he control himself?
It's a choice.
Programs like the MAN program are there to help men to take responsibility for their action, to learn effective, non-violent ways to deal with conflicts. And that's just one program. We have another a small project, a campaign that we're doing right now in the context of, we launched it in the 16 Days of Activism. It's called MASAV, Man, Stand Strong Against Violence Every Day. And this project is based primarily at our calling men to action, to stand as an example to other men, as an example of your non-violence, as an example of your willingness to negotiate, to communicate, to discuss, and to deal with things in a non-violent way, and asking men to stand as advocates. A lot of the bad behavior that happens on men's part. A lot of the violence that men use seems to be validated by other men. When a man says he vexed and he feels to go home and beat up somebody, he's not going to go and he's necessarily going to tell the priest that or his mother. He might tell another guy. And if the other guy says, yeah, you're right, you're not supposed to talk to you so, you're the man in the house, then he feels validated. So we're asking men, stand as examples of nonviolence yourself, and also use the opportunity to stand as an advocate, to work with your peers, your brother, your uncle, whoever you know, to have and use violent tendencies, to say to them, man, there are other ways to deal with conflict.
Indeed.
Stand against violence. It is an investment that we as men have to make in our society, remembering that as fathers, brothers, uncles, whatever we are setting examples every day of our lives in the way we choose to live.
Indeed.
And people are looking at us even when we don't know, and children are modeling our bad behavior or taking examples of bad behavior from what we model as men. And that is why we created this small campaign. It's Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic. We need a Planned Parenthood Association, Caribbean Family Planning Affiliation, which is interesting. The project is twin Grenada and Guyana because we recognize violence in the family, violence against women and girls. It's a regional problem, and we have to do all that we can. I take the point you made earlier, Joseph. It's not a one conversation thing. We're not going to end it now, but we have to do these kinds of conversations as often as we can,
yes,
with as many people as we can, in as many spaces as we can, because we really need people to understand violence has tremendous socioeconomic impacts and implications for our society. And we all have a responsibility to do what we can to ensure that this is dealt with and that we can see a gradual reduction in the incidence of violence. Year after year. It's not just.
It's interesting, yes, though, as we talk about this culture of violence. A man, if you don't dare say to a man anything bad about his mother or his sister, much less tell him about his wife, you don't go home. Tell me what you want about me, and we okay, you know what, I can live with that. But it's interesting. That very same male who would go to hell and back to protect his sister will find it easy to go into another man's camp, as it is, and get involved with a junior female member of that family. Or the very same man who you don't dare hit his sister, who then finds it easy he turns around and hit another man's sister. Why is that so easy?
It's a hypocrisy. It is a hypocrisy because if we are intolerant of it, we are not going to accept you disrespecting our mothers, our sisters, and etc. Then we should not disrespect other people's mothers and sisters.
Hold that thought right there. I see there's a call on the telephone line. Classic, good morning, you're live.
Hey, good morning, Joe.
Yes, go ahead, please.
And your guest. Yes, my last son is 23, and I cannot remember ever having to flog him. But that would not be the case with another child who behaves erratically. You know, so this thing is so complex and so on. Not too long ago, and I say again because I repeated not some time ago on one of our programs, that there was said that there was violence in the House of Parliament, and 2 women were there. To date, none of them have come forward to validate this. This incident still remains unexplained. Yesterday in Parliament, you talk about name calling. The Minister of Government Business, I think it was in the Senate, was calling the people on the other side names, belittling people. So those people must, if we're going to address this, the example must come from the people who are leaders. You hear what he's saying? Telling somebody, a big person on the other side, child, you kindergarten mentality. Where is that? Where is the place for that in the Senate? Can you answer this?
Thank you, sir. Another glaring example of that which we've highlighted, gentlemen.
Well, yes, and again, the issues of emotional abuse, the issues of putting people down and making them feel less of an individual. We have to, as a nation, understand that we must respect each other regardless of who we are. My father used to always say, even the dumb and the ignorant must be respected.
They have their story,
right? They are human beings. So we have to, whenever we have conversations, we must respect people for who they are.
Respecting people for who they are. 10 minutes on to the hour, gentlemen. We're quickly running out of time. The role of the church, we've highlighted this, and very often, gentlemen, you find the church individuals finds themselves at crossroads regarding as it relates to the biblical principles that they would adhere to and their own personal experiences. So the church says does not believe in divorce. However, the woman is in a relationship and the man for some reason figures as his wife and he's entitled to sexual pleasures and everything else. She goes to her pastor and the pastor says to her, well, it's your husband. The church don't believe in divorce, and the cycle continues.
The issue of religion and spiritual belief is a very ticklish area. But the truth is, if we were to read the Bible carefully, first and foremost, we talk about the man is the head of the house, and there must be that sort of leadership, just as how Christ is the head of the church. Now, in the context of a relationship, right? And this is my personal belief. So don't knock me for that. My thing is that even in any organization, you may have heads. You have heads. You have a board. There might be a decision to be made, right? The head might table a decision and the board makes a decision. In the context of a family, there might be decisions to be made. Okay, and if, for example, we are at a stalemate where we're not sure, okay, that head, so to speak, or that household, or that head of the household may have the final say. Okay, may reserve that right to say, okay, let me make that decision, and maybe we could move out of this stalemate, out of this kind of crossroad that we might be at. When we look at the Bible really teaches us that, and when you look at the work of Christ, he did not hold a big stick over us and beat us or came down on us and all of that.
Free will.
Basically, he actually gave his life so that the church, which is considered his bride, would be saved. Now, we sometimes take that out of context and say because we are called to be head, we should be domineering and overpowering and whatever we say goes. No. We when in the context of a relationship, we came in as partners. All right? And sometimes, as far as I am concerned, if my partner have certain strengths, I would want to lean on the strengths that she has so that decision, because of her experience, because of her knowledge, that decision, she would have to make it for the benefit of the family. Now, when men come into the issues of man-to-man, and we begin to talk about that, because the truth is spirituality is one of the things that we talk about. When they come in and we begin to break it down like that, then they say, but I was never taught that. I was taught that as long as I'm called head and leader and man in the house, I have to be domineering, and whatever I say goes.
And it's interesting that you say that, Alter. It's interesting you say that, because fundamental to those Christian principles, right in the middle, is the fact that God, He made each and every one of us free moral agents. He made us free moral agents. Everything we do is a choice that we make. So we choose to serve Him and not to serve Him. So you choose to hit and not to hit. You choose to respect and not to respect. And it goes back, Tyrone, to the point that you keep making. We have to teach our kids taking responsibility for their actions.
Just before you go to Tyrone, just one point I want to make. Like we tell guys when they come in, the only person that you can control is yourself.
True.
Somebody would want to talk to you, however they choose to talk to you, that is their choice. But the only emotion, the emotion that you need to be most concerned about is your own. Right? I just wanted to make that point.
Excellent point.
Yes, I agree. And as I said, it's a program that we've run for quite a long time. Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic. Arthur has been in that journey with us for 15 years. Because, again, the recognition is that people are not all bad all the time. Many of us, we make mistakes. We do things out of high emotion. We do things in anger. We do things because we don't understand how to appropriately express our anger or emotion. So there's a learning process that we must all go through. Man to Man is designed to work with men after they have been charged already and they've gone to court and probably have had a night or three in the jail. But there are other initiatives where we do violence prevention work at the community level with students, with young men and young women to say, learn to respect yourself, learn to demand respect for yourself, and learn to respect others. You don't demand respect by beating up on somebody and exercising any sort of power and control. And too often, all of this business of power and control is linked to some of the words in the Bible. He gave man dominion over things. Dominion is about stewardship. It's about caring, concern, protection, right? The head of the house. Headship is about stewardship. It's about co-leadership. Right? So we have to remind people that, yes, if your religious belief speaks a certain thing, you're free to believe and practice your belief. But also understand that there are certain expectations, because there are many biblical passages that speak to peace, that speak to man loving his wife as Christ himself loved the church, that speak to parents, bringing up their children in the way that they should go, so that when they get old, then when they're old, they will not depart. There is admonition to children to honor their mother and father. So the Bible speaks to all of us at different levels. And the religious community has a responsibility to remind us of those important lessons and to not be tolerant of perpetrators of violence in their midst. Too often, as you said, Joseph, they're told, well, it's your husband, you have to go home and deal with it. And tragic, when I just started this work, it's been more than 30 years, but I remember this almost like if it was yesterday. But that has stayed with me, where there was a woman who complained to her pastor about tremendous physical abuse at the hand of her husband, who was told, go home and make it up. In fact, we didn't even have the stronger legislation that we have today. But go home and make it up. You have to think you can't go and bring your family business out in public and all of that. So the woman was basically forced back into the abusive relationship. And within 2 weeks, the very pastor presided over her funeral. And, she died at the hands of her husband's violence. So I'm just saying, no sector of society must be so tolerant of violence that we allow it to get to that. All our agents of society, government, non-governmental organizations, the church, the family, schools, we all have responsibilities to ensure that our people learn not to resort to violence as a first action, to try everything else, because if you do invest enough time in trying all the alternatives, communication, etc., violence is not an option we have to resort to. And as long as violence is there, I vow to stand in the breach and continue to ask men to stand with us, like stand with agencies like Legal Aid and Planned Parenthood Association. I know Arthur is as committed to this, and we want to just try to do the little that we can where we are, to encourage people. Let's work together in peace and harmony for the better of our society, our families, and extension of our family, our society.
Gentlemen, I wish we could do this for the next hour, but we can't, all things being what they are. Time is against us, but certainly I want to encourage us as we go forward. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Tyrone Buckmeyer. I want to make an appeal for men to understand who you are, that your rites of passage as a man has nothing to do with your ability to smoke a cigarette, to drink how much beer you drink, or your fear that your boys on the blocks will call you all of the feminine names that you're afraid of. The only person that's always said that we can change is me. I can change me. First, I change me, and if I can first learn to appreciate and change me, understand who I am on the inside, then it's possible that we can affect change in each and every one of us. Each and every one of us, we have a responsibility to address this growing pandemic as it is. It is a pandemic. If you thought COVID was bad, COVID is going to come in and it's going to be history one day or the other. But this scourge, it is one that we need to all hands on deck. Civil society, the church, community groups, each and every one of us, we have our parts to play. Until then, so long everybody. Continue to do what you have to do to become the best version of yourself. And again, Arthur, Tyrone, all the best, gentlemen. We are all in this together. We are all in this together. Peace and love.
Indeed.
Happy holidays.
Season's greetings and happy holidays.
Yes, season's greetings, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Until then, folks, so long, everybody. JC loves you. Tis the Season comes up next on GBN Television. Jan is going to be on the inside. Godfrey and graphics. Mike and I will be somewhere on the outside. Take care, folks. All the best.